Now that you've structured text in a web page, let's take our work a step further by introducing images into our pages. When it comes to making engaging websites, images are always a key component to getting the viewer's attention and drawing them further into your website. You don't have to be a graphic designer to work with images in XHTML, but you do need to know how to take the images that you created, or those someone has given you, and put them into web pages. We'll learn about the image tag, and how we reference images on our pages which may not be in the same directory as the web pages we've built so far. In the lessons we've covered so far, we've learned how to create and format text with HTML and style sheets and apply very basic formatting to our web pages. But so far we haven't seen any images in our pages. When you go to a website, typically you see lots of images. Images are one of the things that pull you in to want to read more, to learn about the subject matter being discussed on that web page. Well, how do we get images into our web pages? That's what we're going to take a look at in this chapter. But as we begin to think of the wonderful world of imagery and how we can pull that material into our web page, we suddenly have to think about image formats and production considerations for generating the images that we're going to use inside our page. The more that you, the web designer, know about image formatting and when the appropriate time is, what the appropriate circumstances are for using images in different file formats, the more effective you will be. As you get going as a website designer, you're often going to be the middle person, operating between three constituencies. Hard-code programmers who program applications that work wonderfully and generally don't look that good. Graphic designers who make beautiful-looking graphics but lose the will to live when they look at HTML code. And management who know exactly what they want when they see it, but often don't have the ability to articulate that which they're looking for. Enter you, the web designer. Understanding the priorities of each of those three constituencies, management who controls the project, the application developers who might own applications that are part of your website, and the graphic designers who create your company branding or other graphic elements that you need to incorporate into your page, such as logos, etc. The easier it is for you to speak with these constituencies, the more successful your projects will be. With that in mind, the first question you might ask yourself when creating a web page is, what file format should I use? If you've looked into creating web graphics before, you may have seen that there are a multitude of formats available to you, each of which have parameters that you can modify to change the quality of the image for that format. And it can seem, especially at the beginning, overwhelming and impossible to comprehend. As you develop your skills as a website designer, it's very likely that you will come to perceive the generation of images that go into your web pages as one of the more fun aspects of the website design process. But we need a few guidelines. I hesitate to say the word rule, a few operating guidelines to govern your progress in making your selections on what kind of images you're going to create. Now, we should talk about different categories of images. Any image that you've taken with a digital camera, you were out on the weekend, in the park, took a picture of a bird landing on a bench, what kind of image is that? That is a continuous tone image. Any image taken with a digital camera, generally speaking, is a continuous tone image. That means that the image is a series of pixels, very, very small squares, that when viewed from a distance are perceived to represent an image. You're accustomed to this concept already when you look at your television. If you stand real close to your television screen, you'll see a series of very small squares representing different shades of color that when you back up, your eye perceives as a single image. This is a continuous tone image. When working with continuous tone images targeted towards web pages, generally speaking, we want to use the JPEG format. JPEG allows us to store millions of colors inside an individual image, giving us the flexibility to create high-quality images and integrate them into our web pages. But for graphics that are more heavy on text, or images into which you wish to have some transparency, generally speaking, GIF, which stands for Graphics Interchange Format, is the preferred format you want to use. Unlike JPEG, GIF has a limited range of colors. GIF only supports 256 colors. Because of this limitation, we're not going to use GIF when we have a high-quality image that we wish to display, but we will use GIF if we're going to have text be the principal component of the image. And the reason being is that GIF, unlike JPEG, does not use lossiness in its compression. We'll look at an example of lossiness in a moment, but lossiness is essentially new color artifacts introduced into our image which help smooth the transition between shades of color. This is quite useful when we have a continuous tone image because your mind doesn't perceive those new color artifacts introduced into the image, which help reduce the file size of the image when compressing images in JPEG format. GIF, on the other hand, does not have lossiness in its compression. This is advantageous when we're creating images that have more text in the image than continuous tone graphic. The reason being, when you create an image and have the majority of that image as text and save it as a JPEG, the lossiness compression creates what look like little speckled bits floating around the text. The end result is the perception of that text looks lousy. Even though you may be creating the image within a normal range of compression, the end result can result in the, ooh, that doesn't look good at all perception. Where GIF, not having lossiness in its compression, doesn't introduce those extra characters. So, since text, more often than not, is less complex than a continuous tone graphic, that text will look better in GIF format. And GIF also supports background transparency. So if you didn't want a background color to be part of your image, if you just wanted, say, text characters to be contained in your image with no background color, GIF is the preferred format for doing that because JPEG will not support background transparency. Another thing you want to think about when you're getting ready to create your images is color space. I've met many web designers who began their careers in website design not knowing the difference between RGB and CYMK color spaces, and only asked the question when they embedded a JPEG inside their web page, which we'll learn how to do in this chapter, and found that even though they coded the reference to the image correctly, the image wouldn't show up in their web page, and they'd spend hours and hours wondering, why won't this thing, which I know I've done right, work? Not realizing that the JPEG that they were trying to embed inside their web page was in the CMYK color space, and the web browser typically will not recognize a CYMK image. Bearing that in mind, you might be wondering, what does RGB and CYMK stand for? RGB stand for the red, green, and blue color channels, which are interpreted by the color engine of whatever graphics program you use to create your images, to create the color tones that make up your image. CMYK, on the other hand, is used typically for printing. You may have heard of four-color printing. Four-color printing comes from CYMK for four values, cyan, magenta, yellow, and K for black. We won't be working in the CYMK color space in this lesson, but it's important to know that it exists, and we'll take a quick look in a graphics program as to how you switch between CYMK and RGB color spaces. In addition to your file format and your color space consideration when working with images, you want to think about image dimension. Now we're going to examine how we can use HTML to change image sizes. However, again, I hesitate to use the word rule, but as a guideline, generally speaking, when working with images in HTML pages, you more often than not want to size your images at the size that you intend for them to be viewed inside the web browser, rather than using HTML to command the browser to display the image at a particular size. This is less of an issue for continuous tone images, but it is a major issue for any image that has text contained within it. Because when a browser, as we'll see in a future lesson, sizes an image down, it's not modifying the image. Rather, it's only manipulating the display of the image. And as we'll see with text, text in an image, when modified by a web browser, can look really bad really fast. So it's a good idea for you to get into the habit of sizing your images at the target size at which you'd like to see them inside your web browser. Let's take a look at how some of these considerations can be addressed inside a graphics program.